Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Cell and Gene, the podcast. I'm your host, Erin Harris, and I'm happy to introduce my guest to you, Christopher McDonald. He is the global head of technical operations at Kite Pharma. We're going to dive into Kite's recent FDA approval of manufacturing process change that resulted in reduced median turnaround time for Yescarta, but we will get into all that. But before we do, Chris, welcome to Cell and Gene, the podcast. I'm really happy you're here.
Well, thanks, Erin. I appreciate you making the time for me. And I'm calling in from a very gloomy, rainy Santa Monica, which you don't say that often.
I was going to say, I don't really feel badly for you. So
Yes.
I'm in the Northeast, and so it's 40 degrees and it's a heat wave. So
The streets are literally flooding here today. So it's definitely the rainiest I probably have seen it in Southern California.
Oh my goodness. Oh, well, all right. Well, I'm glad you're joining us for this podcast, and hopefully you can get your mind off the rain a little bit. All right. So for our listeners who I'm assuming everybody knows, but just in case, it was recently announced that the FDA has approved shortening the manufacturing time for Kite's CAR T cell therapy, Yescarta. Yescarta, we know, is a one-time treatment currently approved for relapsed refractory large B-cell lymphoma and follicular lymphoma. So I want to talk a little bit about, for listeners who may not have heard the news or who even may have heard the news, like we said, the new median turnaround time from leukapheresis to product release in the U.S. Talk to us about the time frame. The manufacturing time was reduced from what to what, and why?
Yeah, well, thank you. I think we're really excited about this approval. And as you indicated, we expect that we'll be going from a 16-day median turnaround time down to a 14-day. And 16 days currently is the industry's best. And so, what I would point out is that while we're making improvements, where we're starting is currently the industry best. And what we've been able to do, one of our scientists had an idea in the labs a couple of years ago, and really had an idea about a process improvement. And as we did some studies in the labs, we found that process improvement could actually reduce the manufacturing time from 7 days to 5 days, and demonstrate that we had comparable product. And so we were able to make that change, reducing our manufacturing time, which ultimately reduces our overall turnaround time. I think you probably know this, but Yescarta is the first and only treatment that has demonstrated overall survival as standard of care in the second-line treatment of, these very sick patients, and it has a curative intent. And what we know is the faster you can get to these patients are really sick. The faster you can get to these patients, the more likely they are to receive the treatment. And so super excited about the change and the impact it's going to have on patients.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit more about the significance for the patient more broadly later on in this conversation. But I want to talk a little bit about the pathway to approval. We know the importance of working with the FDA and certainly what that looks like. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the most significant steps that Kite had to take to reach this approval? What did you do to work with the FDA? When did you start? What did it look like? Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, I think anytime you're making a major lifecycle management improvement, it's not easy, especially for a current licensed product. And so I mentioned a little bit about how we have process development scientists who came up with ideas, did studies in the labs, and that was really the beginning of it versus the end of it. From that point, we completed significant characterization studies demonstrating the comparability of the process. We interacted with FDA, filed a comparability protocol with them that they reviewed and approved, and then we had to execute tech transfer to two of our large manufacturing facilities. We have a commercial manufacturing facility in El Segundo, California, and another one in Frederick, Maryland, that are both producing for the U.S., demonstrate that they could produce the material comparable, and gather all that data, do all the analytical testing, put together a regulatory filing, and file it with FDA. And so, sometimes it seems like, we simplified our manufacturing process, but it really took years to work through this and get it executed across our manufacturing plants.
Sure. Okay. from having worked with the FDA, not only certainly for the life of Yescarta, but also for this particular approval, you know, maybe talk to us a little bit some of the lessons learned, best practices that you can now look back, that you and your team have learned from having worked on this particular approval with the FDA.
Yeah. Well, and I think, even across my entire career, I've been in this industry for over 30 years. FDA plays an instrumental part in making sure that we can deliver products to patients. I think our relationship with them is really good, and we have very collaborative discussions with them. And I guess that's the one thing that I would say is I think getting with the FDA and presenting your plans to them early, they can help shape those and make sure that you're providing them the data that they need. But I would say the one thing that often I hear people say, why don't we just go ask FDA? I think the one thing that I would make sure and recommend is that when you go ask FDA, you bring data, right? And I think they're very data driven and scientific, so I think Kite does a really good job of understanding what the needs of FDA are, and then when we engage them and have discussions with them around things like this, we're bringing the right level of data and having the right level of discussions with them.
Good. Okay. I do want to ask a quick question about you're not the only person. Even Dr. Peter Marks has been on our podcast twice, and he often uses, work with the FDA early. But I'm always sort of stymied by the word early.
Yeah.
What do you mean by early? How early is early? What is early?
Yeah.
Way to define that.
I agree, and I think to your point, it's the definition of early is when you actually have something to talk about. I mean, and so I think it'd be great if you could just brainstorm with them. But I really do think the more data that you can bring into the conversations and have it be a scientific conversation rooted in data, the more successful the discussion and the more fruitful the discussion is going to be. And so Dr. Marks does often talk about going to them early, and there are mechanisms of getting in front of FDA in different forums and different types of meetings, type C meetings, et cetera. But again, I think if you have an idea, if you have data backing that idea, that it makes the conversation a lot more fruitful.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I think it's,
So early, I mean, the definition of early, I think it's early when you've actually generated some data, if that makes sense.
That's a great definition and a very concrete one. So thank you. All right, I want to go back a little bit and talk about, at the top of our discussion, we did briefly mention the significance of this approval on the patient. And, if we could dive into that a little bit more, how is this really impacting the patient who is, the recipient of Yescarta at the end of the day? And then just, cell therapies in general, where are we with, CAR T cell therapy and it's significant on the patient now and in the near future?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think I saw in one article it said incremental improvements, and to me it almost seemed like it was downplaying maybe the actual improvement. Every day does matter for these patients, and so these patients are extremely sick. I think one testament of how important this is I have actually had colleagues from competing CAR T companies reach out and congratulate us and me personally on making this improvement, because I think when you're in this industry, you understand again how important the turnaround time is for the patient. And we're the best, and I mentioned this earlier, we're the best in the industry with our 16-day turnaround time, now becoming a 14-day turnaround time. But even with that, we often have patients cancel their treatments because their disease progresses while they're waiting for the therapy. And so, I think the point is that every day does really matter. Every day matters for these patients, and I'm so excited about this 14 days and shaving 2 days off our turnaround times. But I also want to point out that we're not stopping there, and we need to continue. The industry needs to continue, but Kite needs to continue to make the investments to continue to drive that turnaround time, and really be able to deliver for patients.
Yeah, sure, certainly. And I think, Kite certainly is the premier company in the industry doing so. And one of many companies that are doing wonderful things in this space for sure. I want to talk a little bit kind of broadly actually about your thoughts on scaling up technologies for cell therapy manufacturing. We cover this a lot on Cell and Gene, and I'm always interested to talk to my guests on this podcast about what some of the lessons that they've learned from attempting to and actually being able to scale up technologies for cell therapy manufacturing. What are some of the lessons you've learned along the way?
Yeah, I could probably talk to you for a couple hours on this. It's top of mind, I think, for the industry and for me personally. A few things. I think my own. I've been with Kite over 5 years, and joined Kite to build our plant in Maryland, which was and is rooted in automation technology, and so been studying this for 5 years. But I think just recently, I've had some evolution of my own thoughts around automation. So I guess real quick, let me just start by saying some of my ahas are sometimes you hear people in the industry saying, oh, we have this novel automation technology, or automation is going to solve the cost problem. And all of a sudden, the cost of manufacturing is going to come down substantially. But really, the cost of delivering to patients from the logistics cost of shipping the apheresis, and the material cost, and the manufacturing costs, the quality control costs. There's a lot that goes into the overall value chain, and the direct labor of manufacturing is a significant part of it, but not the only part of it. And so the one thing I would say is automation is not going to be the silver bullet for reducing the costs. And so we're really focused on not just the manufacturing automation, but also the QC automation. And we're really focused on technologies that help us improve our logistics. And I guess the point being is that you can't just tackle manufacturing from an automation perspective. You really need to tackle the entire value stream. I think the second thing I've learned is that a lot of times you think, okay, I'm going to implement this automation and it's going to reduce my costs. But what you find is that the material costs sometimes are as much as your labor costs. And so you implement automation and you might be reducing your labor costs, but you might be increasing your material costs. And so I guess in that frame, I've been thinking about that for a while, and I was like, well, that's no good. Why would you automate if that were the case? But I guess my most recent learning is one of the hardest things to do within cell therapy is to really forecast accurately. And I think Kite's in a much better position than some of the smaller companies, because now we have the scale, and we're able to react to upsides in demand and downsides in demand. But I think if you're a smaller company and then all of a sudden your product takes off, do you have the scale to manufacture it? The less people that it takes, the more important it is to be automated. The less people it takes, the easier it is to respond to that upside demand. And so the more important automation might play. And so I do think automation is really important. I think it's, again, not just about manufacturing, but it's about the entire value chain. And so how do you really drive that?
Yeah, sure. Makes perfect sense. And yes, while automation is a key component, it's not the entire answer. So
Yep.
Makes perfect sense. I want to talk a little bit about your role as global head of technical operations and how you specifically played a part in this FDA approval. Talk us through exactly what you and your team had to do with bringing this over the finish line.
Yeah, well, I don't really do anything. My wife calls me useless overhead. What I would say is we have a great team at Kite, and we often talk about it being a team sport. Cell therapy manufacturing and cell therapy delivery is really a team sport. It's not just across tech ops, but across the entire team at Kite. But I think within the tech ops organization, really a lot of people had to come together, from process development to manufacturing to quality to regulatory affairs, and come together to put together the implementation plan and execute upon it. And without them, we wouldn't have gotten this done. And I think the one thing I want to mention is Kite Kite's really a special place to work. I think it's the one place that I've worked in my career that's truly patient focused. And I think it's, the fact that, we literally have patient cells in our hands on a daily basis, and the importance of our work to the patient outcome is just, it just resonates with our staff. Maybe more so than other places I've worked in the past. And I'm not saying manufacturing doesn't play an important role across the biopharma industry, but typically what I used to make would be getting sold 2 years from now, out of inventory. And what we're making today is being infused into a patient within 16 days often, right? And so, I really think the contribution that technical operations makes to successful CAR-T is so important and so close to the patients that it just creates this really special place to work where people are willing to go above and beyond to deliver. And I think the team really has done that for this, this 5-day, manufacturing process improvement and the 14-day turnaround times that we're seeing.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And I do love the degree of altruism that goes into everyone who is on your team and, employed by Kite to bring these therapies to the people who need them even faster. So that's great. Okay. So, but what are your say top goals for the tech ops team for this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, we have the industry's best turnaround time, success rate. The other thing I think that we understand the importance of is making sure we have capacity when the patient needs it, and so carrying the extra capacity so that if a patient's prescribed Yescarta Tecartus today, they can be apheresis immediately, and so that sometimes we talk about turnaround time, but we don't maybe emphasize the importance of having the capacity as well, so that the patient doesn't have to go on a waiting list. And so I guess my most important goal every year is to make sure that we do the best we can to deliver to the patients. But then secondly, I think it's, how do we improve? And I often say internally, we're the best in the industry at what we do, yet we're not good enough. And so how do we continue to improve? How do we drive that? And, how do we continue to work on our turnaround times? How, at 96% success rate sounds incredible, but, we've treated 17,700 patients to date. And so I think about that 4% that we had failures on. How do we continue to improve upon that and drive that even higher?
That's wonderful. And then the patients who you're currently treating and will treat in the future are counting on that. So that's great.
Yep.
All right. So we've reached the end of our episode, and my guests hopefully know by now that at the end, I like to get to know who my guests are when they're not in the office or the lab, helping to create life-saving therapies. And as we talked about at the top of the call, you reside in California. Obviously today, like you said, it's teeming rain, so probably needed, but at the same time, not the best day in California, weather-wise. But here's my question. So you obviously work and reside in California. If you had to move or live anywhere else, where would you go and why?
Yeah, well, I have in my career, I've moved, I think 10 times now, and typically not short moves, typically cross country moves, and so I've covered the U.S. Multiple times, and I've gotten to live in a lot of great places. But I think the one place that always calls me back is Colorado, and so I've lived in Boulder, Colorado, and just outside of Boulder, Colorado, on 3 different occasions, and so I know there will be a 4th occasion. I really hope and expect that the job I'm in now is my last job, and I love working for Kite. I love what we do every day. And then I expect that a moving van will be carrying my stuff to Colorado when I'm finished.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And I hope that as you near the exit ramp, that, moving truck is waiting for you to head right to Colorado. I have not actually, in all of my travel, I have never been to Colorado, maybe through an airport, but that's about it.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
but I've heard wonderful things.
Yeah, it's from my perspective, it's 300 sunny days a year and a lot of outdoor activities, and I love to snowboard and hike, and I'm a cyclist, and so I think it's a great place to live and great people. And I love Southern California. I've actually had never lived here and been here for 3.5 years. And the weather, oh my gosh, it'll be hard to leave the weather.
Sure.
But yes, we'll be excited to get back to Boulder.
That's wonderful. I hope you make it there, and I hope it's Kite. I'm certain that when the time comes, we'll be sad to see you go, but I'm excited for you and your family as you move out to Colorado when that day comes. That's exciting. All right, well, listeners, that's it for this episode of Cell and Gene, the podcast. Thanks for tuning in to hear my discussion with Kite Farmers, Chris McDonald. Chris, thank you so much for your time. This was a lot of fun and really informative.
Erin, thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.